downtown Decatur, it's the Faber Files. Hello, I'm your host, Bill Faber. Because democracy demands debate, we present this program of public issues and interests. Nowhere else on broadcast TV do you see extended conversations about local issues and about local personalities. Tonight's program is an excerpt of the Father Mangan lecture series. Attorney Josh Rohrscheib will make the presentation. In my book, these lecture series are so important to our community. You know, the prophet Micah said, "What God requires of us is to do justice." And the focus of the Father Mangan's lectures and his life and tonight's conversation is about doing justice in our community, in our state, in our nation. I hope you enjoy this lecture series 2015. Thank you.
Right. Hands of the staff. Thank you. So, my name is John Dunn. I'm technically the moderator this evening, and I wish it was all about me, but it's not. So, we'll proceed right into the program, and Steve John is going to lead us in the first song, Whatsoever You Do. And there'll be a refrain, and he asks we join in on the refrain, which should be whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. That will be the refrain. And I don't think we have it. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me.
All right, let's have a show of hands. How many have been at Sunday Mass at St. James? Okay. How many of you have been at Sunday Mass anywhere? And about half of you should be familiar with this. Please join. The refrain is very simple. The refrain is, whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me.
Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me.
Again.
Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. When I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. Now enter into the home of my Father. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. When I was homeless, you opened your door. When I was naked, you gave me your coat. Now enter into the home of my Father. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. When I was weary, you helped me find rest. When I was anxious, you calmed all my fears. Now enter into the home of my Father. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me.
Thank you, Steve. And all well know, we are here for the annual Martin Mangan lecture. Martin Mangan was a beloved priest, born and raised in Springfield, Illinois, and very active in labor relations, and was the pastor of St. James Catholic Church for many years until his death. So we celebrate him annually in his activism and your activism. So that's what this is all about this evening. Now we have in the agenda some brief remarks about Father Mangan by Bob Sampson. Bob, please come forward.
Thank you, John. I guess it's a mark of the passage of time that when we first started this series in 2001, we didn't have to have anybody get up and say who Martin Mangan was, because everybody indicated knew him. But it's been 13 years since he died. I see a lot of young faces in the audience that probably were maybe not even in high school when all this stuff happened. And usually we talk about his efforts and his courage during the Decatur War Zone, which involved the lockout at 80 Staley and intermittent strikes at Caterpillar and Bridgestone, Firestone, that arguably changed this community forever, and not necessarily in good ways. But the one person who was consistently taking the side of working men and women in this community all the way to London, England, was Father Mangan. We have see pictures here on the easels. I think Josh will probably maybe even show some tonight where he was arrested, did a lot of stuff behind the scenes. But it's easy to talk about that and lose sight of this whole other side of his personality, which I think is what behind it, so many of us that are here tonight and knew him, to him, I can say I'm Father Mangan's best friend, and everybody in this room who knew him can say they were his best friend, because that was the feeling he gave you. Trying to describe Mitz Mangan in a way that makes any sense, it came to me today that will sort of describe that bond he had with people. Would be if you're like me, when you were a little kid, you collected fireflies. You know, you catch them at night, and at a certain time when you put them in a glass jar. Well, how do you describe to somebody who doesn't have a firefly in front of them what it's like? What does it look like? How do you capture that particular type of light and how it flickers and glows? And you can't. You know, you have to say, here's a firefly. Well, we can't do that, sadly. I think what we often overlook is his humor. And there's this, as you can see in some of these pictures, he was born with a twinkle in his eye. And when you were around him, even in sometimes the most serious moments, there was always the expectation that he's going to do something or say something funny that's going to make you feel better immediately. And there are lots of stories about him. Bishop Daniel Ryan, who was the bishop of Springfield for much of his time, told me once that Mitz was the funniest man he ever met. And he had spent time with Mitz when they were both students in Rome, which is one of the stories that Mitz delighted in telling and people told about him. Mangan had never been on an airplane. He took a boat to Rome. He was going to study for his PhD. So as part of their holiday, they decided to take a flight out of Rome. I think they were going to Vienna or somewhere to the north. They were going to fly over the Alps. And so this is Mangan's first flight. This is Mitz's first flight. That was his nickname. So I'll just call him Mitz from now on. This is Mitz's first flight. So we'll let him sit right by the window. So the plane takes off and they're chatting among themselves. And all of a sudden, Mangan gets real excited and says, gee, I never realized when these things took off and got up in the air, they turned the engines off. Well, it wasn't by design. And so they actually, not all the engines, the one he was looking at was off. And so they had to turn around and fly back. So I guess it was good he didn't know. He didn't have a moment of panic. He was raised in a household in which his grandfather, his maternal grandfather, and his maternal uncle lived. This uncle, Leo, was quite a character. He was, I guess, he was something like Garrison Keillor's Norwegian bachelor farmer, where he was an Irish bachelor, something. He just sort of lived right there in the house with him. And over the years, he had a dating relationship with a woman named Mary. And I think by this time they were both in their 70s. And so one day, Mary came to him and said, "Well, don't you think we ought to get married?" And Leo said, "Who'd have us?" Well, they did get married by Father Mangan. And on the way out of the church, Leo called Father Mangan over and said, "I'll name the first one after you." Perhaps one of the strongest, well, the last bit of humor he had, actually, was his funeral was here in St. James. They actually had an overflow crowd in the gym. They had live TV, and I never saw so many priests in one place in my life. I was pushing to go to the Vatican to see that many priests in one place. But every priest, I think, in Illinois that had vestments was there in the church, and so there wasn't a lot of room. But anyway, and two bishops presiding, and Bishop Ryan gets up and very serious look on his face and says, "Well, I have something here that Father Mangan gave me to read to all of you." First thing, this is going to be a party thing where we're going to start crying right at once, and we're not going to get over it. So he pulls out this piece of paper and reads very solemnly, "I'll be lying in the casket, and someone else will be lying in the pulpit." So that was Dick Mangan, fun to the end. He also had this ability, an obsession to make people feel good. And he would come up to you, he could tell you when you were down, and he would sort of get that twinkle in his eye, that grin on his face, that little roll in his gait. If you saw, I knew how he walked and how he carried himself. He was an athlete, so he had that sort of athleticism even in his late 60s and 70s. He'd look at you right in the eye and say, "Do you know how good you are? Do you know how good you are?" Well, the first, at least for me, the first reaction was, "Oh, no, I want to tell you how bad I am." And he said, "No, you know how good you are? Don't say anything. Just say thanks." So that's what we're doing here tonight. Just saying thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Probably quite a few in the room were at that funeral. I know I was, and I heard that very much. The place went up for grabs. The church was full. There were people across the street in school watching on closed circuit television. There was such a big crowd. And when that happened, it just went gangbusters. Vintage Mangan. Everyone has a story who knows him. So we're here to honor him this evening, and to do that, we have an annual speaker, and tonight it is a young man who wasn't around. By the way, A.E. Staley Company has now taken mine, for those of you who are really young in this room. It's the same company with a different name. So our speaker this evening did his undergraduate work at the University of Illinois in Champaign, and he also went to the University of Illinois College of Law in Champaign. He received his law degree cum laude, which means very important, very good. He was student body president, and I have a long list of accomplishments which...
Your attention, please. The library will be closing in 15 minutes. Please make your final selections and bring the library down. The checkout counter will close promptly at 7 o'clock. Thank you.
All right, so I will make it short. So Josh is a very interesting young man, so young, a lot of accomplishments. He's a strong interest in public policy, public service, and very active in the community. So would you please welcome Attorney Josh Rohrscheib.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I'd like to privilege of knowing Father Mangan, but I'm very grateful to have come to know something of this wise, courageous, and kind spirit through his writing and through his friends who shared their memories with me. And I'd like to start with one of his famous homilies. He was known to give incredibly short homilies. So this, which was, I think, an act of mercy, but also an act that took great editing. I've read through a book that Gary Minnick has compiled, and really they read like poetry. They're very precise and beautifully written. So the piece we're going to start with was a homily from November 17th, 1993. Instead of reading the gospel, I'm going to tell it to you. And then he turned to those on the other side and said, "Depart from me, you accursed, into the fire prepared for all eternity. You sat in judgment on me. When I was hungry, you gave me nothing to eat because you thought I could get food stamps. When I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink because you thought I drink too much. When I was naked, you gave me no clothes because you thought I wouldn't take care of them. When I was in prison, you did not visit me because you thought I deserved to be there. And you did not visit me when I was sick because you thought I was always sick. When I was homeless, you did not take me in because you thought I could find a home if I wanted. Whatever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do to me. Christ the King, on final judgment, will not judge us by our wealth, by our education, or by our accomplishments, but by how we treated the poor." So tonight we're going to talk about how we treat the poor and how we allow the poor in our community to be treated. Tonight, this discussion will center on hyper-local issues, because we wanted to focus on things that folks in this room might be able to change. I'd like to start with a few recent successes. I think it's important when we're going to talk about some challenges, to also talk about some wins, because they remind us that we can have wins. First, a very recent success, the City of Decatur noise ordinance. I feel a little bad about picking on Representative Dunn when he gave such a kind introduction, but if you could imagine, he's a great lover of Irish folk music, and if you could imagine him driving down the road, listening to Danny Boy, getting like really into it, with the system all the way up, and then all of a sudden, his surprise, a pair of police lights light up behind him. What would happen to him? And until very recently, he'd be pulled over. He would be fined $250 as the driver of the car. He'd be fined an additional $250 as the owner of the car. Then his car would be towed and impounded, and our friend would be left standing on the side of the road. And then if he wanted to, then he'd have to pay the tow fee to get the car back. He'd have to post a bond for the city fee. And if you wanted to contest it, you'd have to pay $140 to the city in court costs. And you'd also have to pay storage fees. His out-of-pocket costs could exceed $700. It was also a public safety issue, because if it's not John Dunn, it might be a single mother with 4 or 5 kids, and left standing on the roadside with her children. And one of the saddest stories that arose from this were people who actually lost their cars because they couldn't afford to post a bond, and they couldn't afford to pay the towing fees. So the car sat in the impound lot collecting additional daily fees until the impound lot sold the car for the lien that they had from storage. So this really raises some questions about what city government should do. Should penalties be punitive, or should they be proportionate? How do you strike that balance? And just a little bit more history in this ordinance. It was passed about 11 years ago, and 1,625 cases were brought until the change in the ordinance. It was a high of 239 in 07, and this year there were more than 90. I'm not sure what the final number was. But the one really important fact that I think drove a lot of the reform effort is the offenders hardly ever looked like Representative Dunn. If you look at the numbers, 70% of those who were cited into this were black, and where only 23% of our population is black. So I think a lot of people in the community got this very reasonable feeling that this was a case of driving while black. Kelly and I even have a friend who didn't even have a working sound system in his car, and was still taken with the noise ordinance violation. So when people hear stories like that, it kind of spurred them to action. So in this case, there were really 4 people who were the driving force behind bringing about this change. And they gathered up their friends and got 500 signatures signed, and they met with members of the city council. And over time, they met with them again, and they continued to appear before the council and speak to the injustice they perceived. And eventually, the city did the right thing. They changed their policy, and they started giving first offenders a simple warning. So the good news, perhaps, for Representative Dunn is he can get away with that just once, without having the kind of iron hand of the city come down on. The second somewhat recent win is also a city government issue, and it concerns payday and car title lending. This is a sad truth that I know many in the room are familiar with. Our community has more than 25 payday and car title lenders, and these companies charge interest rates up to 400%. The average in Illinois, and I believe in our community, is 340%. Many states, I think 16 states, have outlawed payday and car title lending, or at least imposed much lower caps on interest rates, like in the 36% range. And it's also important to note that the people who get these loans usually are people who are working, because payday loans require a payday to secure the loan. But they're the working poor. On average, the folks who earn under $25,000 a year. And the net economic impact is really substantial. Over $1.7 million leaves our community through fees and interest rates associated with these loans. So I was really blessed to get to know a group called Illinois People's Action, who decided to take up this issue. There are several local leaders of Illinois People's Action here today. It's a faith-based group, and there are member churches and also individual members. Central Christian, First Pres, Unitarian Church, several local churches can come together to be part of this group and seek policy changes at the local and state level. And our leader during this time was Michael Hoy, who noted that such loans at the current users' rates are damaging to people, and they create a cycle of debt from which persons trapped in these loans cannot escape. There's a photo of kind of the group of us who were working on this, or some of the group. And through many meetings with the city, we were fortunate that they agreed to pass an ordinance asking the state to do something. And I think many in the city council felt like that's the best they could do. And it was, in part, kind of passing the buck, but they at least stood together to take a stand and make a statement. Later, through kind of continued activism and organizing, they were persuaded to pass a zoning ordinance to try to limit any other lenders from coming to town. And I think a lot of us were disappointed and frustrated that this was the best we could do. So there are other things city government could do, but it takes a lot of a force of will and a little bit of risk tolerance. And because some of the things that could be done, like a licensing regime, do invite litigation risk. And these guys have payday lenders, kind of by definition, have deep pockets because they've stolen vast sums of money from people. But eventually the city did pass a zoning ordinance, and it has been effective, at least to some degree. There have been 2 payday lenders since the ordinance has been passed who were kind of interested in coming here who didn't because of the ordinance. So I think that's an important small win. But the payday lending question also kind of forces us to take a look at how responsive we are to threats to our people, the kind of poor people in our community, and the working poor in particular. Because the truth is, our city council let the pitch go by. They waited way too long to do anything until there was already such a saturation in our community that there's very little that could be done about it. And I think we might have another similar issue where we're approaching a critical moment that we'll get to just a little later. The final kind of recent success I wanted to note is very recent. Just, I think in the last 2 weeks, there was an article in the Herald and Review about this. Macon County will soon be getting a mortgage foreclosure mediation program. So, like so many communities, after 08 and 09, there was a huge spike in foreclosures.
The library will be closing in 5 minutes. Please make your way to the exit now. Thank you.
There were almost 500 foreclosures filed in 2010 in Macon County. Now it's kind of normalized to about 200 a year. And 9 counties in Illinois were trying to do something about this and came up with these programs to try to help people stay in their homes. Litigants in these cases, the borrowers, are placed in this horrible position. They typically can't afford a lawyer. They don't understand what's happening to them. The process is incredibly daunting. The terms are confusing. And I think on just a human level, they feel embarrassed and hopeless and overwhelmed. they don't know what to do or where to turn. And often when those kind of feelings in a litigation system can make someone pause just a little too long until enough action is taken that there's really not much they can do. So here's what a foreclosure mediation program does. It requires a borrower and the lender to meet together and have open communication with a third-party independent mediator who can make sure that the borrower understands what's going on and can help them appreciate and understand what options they might actually have to stay in their home and keep their home. And this is a win-win. It's a win for the lenders, it's a win for the borrowers, it's a big win for the community, because if, as many of you might know, if your neighbor's house is foreclosed upon, the value of your home drops. But the opening of these lines of communications ultimately helps borrowers keep their home. So county officials here have filed an application with the state Supreme Court, and the plan is to have this program up and running sometime in 2015. In Cook County, 1 out of every 3 homes is saved through such a program. And I think when we think about the differences between Central Illinois and Cook County, I think we can see that we probably have a real opportunity to do considerably better than that, given it's a lot easier to save an $80,000 home than a $400,000 home. So I think there's a lot to be excited about. And I think the most remarkable thing about this particular story is that only one person had to push for this change. One person wrote one letter to our exceptional county board chairman, Jay Dunn. And then Jay got interested and talked to him about it and had a conversation with our presiding judge, H.E. Weber, and then the wheels were set in motion. And when we think about the challenges our community is facing, it's really important to remember that sometimes just one person writing one letter can make a difference. In this case, it's a difference that will quite literally save hundreds of homes and keep hundreds of